The first time Eliza met Rowan, it felt as though fate had pulled two strangers into the same orbit. He was the sort of man who filled a room without effort, confident yet soft-spoken, carrying a calmness that made others lean closer just to hear him speak. For Eliza, who had grown up in a quiet coastal town, his presence was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. Their courtship unfolded quickly, the way storms creep in without warning. Dinners by candlelight, whispered promises on rainy evenings, and long walks along the cliffs where he'd wrap his coat around her shoulders. Every moment stitched itself into a tapestry of romance too perfect to doubt. "I'll never let anything hurt you," Rowan told her once, his hand tightening gently around hers. His words carried weight, the kind that settled deep in her chest, convincing her she had finally found the safety she craved. But safety can be a dangerous illusion. On their wedding day, sunlight poured through the church windows, casting a golden haze over the polished wooden pews. Guests dabbed at their eyes as Eliza, radiant in ivory, slipped the ring onto his finger. A photographer captured the moment he smiled down at her, a smile that seemed tender at first glance. Yet if one looked closely, the edges of that smile never quite reached his eyes. The reception was filled with laughter, champagne, and the illusion of a love story unfolding just as it should. Eliza laughed the loudest, clinging to every word he whispered in her ear. Still, there were small things, fleeting things that brushed against her happiness like shadows slipping across the floor. The way Rowan's gaze lingered too long on people who looked at her. The sharpness in his voice when she disappeared from his side for more than a moment. None of it seemed important then. To Eliza, love was louder than doubt. As the music faded that night and the last of the guests drifted home, Rowan leaned close, pressing his lips against her ear. "Now," he whispered, almost too softly to catch, "you're mine." But the vows they exchanged that day would one day feel like a curse. The honeymoon glow did not last. In the first weeks, Eliza convinced herself that the sharp edges in Rowan's personality were nothing more than stress. A demanding job, sleepless nights, the weight of building a future together. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tenderness she fell in love with began to fracture. It started with his voice. "Do you always have to laugh like that in front of people?" he muttered one evening, the corners of his jaw tightening as though her joy itself offended him. She laughed it off at first, brushing her hand against his arm, but his eyes remained flat, unreadable. Soon, small disagreements became landmines. A misplaced key, a dinner cooked a little too late, a glance at her phone that lasted seconds too long. Each sparked a fury he struggled to hide. When friends visited, Rowan transformed. He was witty, generous, the perfect host pouring wine and asking thoughtful questions. To them, he was a man deeply in love. But as soon as the door closed behind their guests, his smile slipped away like a mask falling to the floor. "You embarrass me when you talk too much," he hissed one night, his voice low but edged with venom. Eliza stood frozen in the dim hallway, her reflection caught in the antique mirror beside her. The glass, cracked at one corner, fractured her face into shards. It was the first time she truly wondered if the person she had married was not the man she believed at all. Whispers began to circle, subtle questions from her cousin, a quiet warning from a childhood friend who claimed Rowan's charm seemed too rehearsed. Eliza dismissed them all, clutching tightly to the image of the man who had once promised her forever. But shadows were lengthening inside their home, stretching across Rowan's face each time his temper flared. She had no idea the man she married was already planning her future without her in it. The arguments faded into something colder. Silence. Rowan had mastered it, using it like a blade. When Eliza asked about the late nights, the glowing phone he kept turned face down on the table, or the receipts tucked into his jacket for restaurants she had never visited, he would simply stare at her until her words died in her throat. "Why are you always suspicious?" he snapped one night, shoving the receipts into his pocket. "You should be grateful for what you have." Gratitude, she realized, was his way of demanding obedience. The house grew heavier with secrets. His phone, rang after midnight, vibrating against the wood of the bedside table, but he never answered in front of her. She caught glimpses of messages, names she didn't recognize, numbers saved without photographs. Each time she asked, he twisted the story until she questioned her own memory. Isolated, her only sanctuary became a small, leather-bound diary she hid beneath the drawer of her dressing table. At first, the entries were simple notes of unease, but soon her handwriting turned frantic, scrawling fears she could not voice aloud, and one entry in that diary would later become the key piece of evidence. The perfume was the first thing. It clung to Rowan's shirt in a way no cologne ever could, sweet and unfamiliar, like a ghost following him into their home. Eliza held the fabric to her nose in the dim kitchen light, her hand trembling. It wasn't hers. Then came the earrings, small, silver, and left carelessly in the back seat of their car. Eliza stared at them as though they were evidence in a trial no one else could see. "Whose are these?" she asked quietly when he returned late one night, her voice barely holding. Rowan's eyes narrowed, then softened with practiced ease. "You're imagining things again, Eliza. Do you not trust me at all?" Gaslight. The word hadn't yet reached her lips, but its presence pressed heavily on her chest. He twisted every confrontation into a fault of her own. Her paranoia, her insecurity, her fragile imagination. By the end of their arguments, she found herself apologizing, even as tears blurred her vision. At night, when the house fell silent, fear began to creep where love once lived. She could not sleep beside him without wondering who else had touched the shirt folded on their bed, who else had whispered into the phone he clutched so tightly. Still, she stayed, out of hope, out of fear, out of a dangerous cocktail of both. If she had trusted her instincts then, her fate might have been different. The perfume, the earrings, the whispered lies, they had all built toward something Eliza couldn't name, but she felt it pressing in on her like a storm about to break. The night it finally came, the house seemed unnaturally still, as though it already knew what was about to happen. Neighbors later recalled the sounds, faint at first, then sharper. A muffled cry, a thud against a wall, the scrape of furniture, on wooden floors. Then silence. The kind of silence that gnaws at memory because it feels so deliberate. Mrs. Calloway from across the street swore she saw a flicker of light in the upstairs bedroom window. It went out quickly, plunging the house back into darkness. No one knocked. No one dared. Days passed, and Eliza was nowhere to be seen. The blinds remained drawn. Rowan, with his effortless charm, told anyone who asked that she had gone to visit her cousin in Devon, that she simply needed time away from the city. His words were smooth, convincing, but his eyes were harder now, like glass catching in the sun. "Marriage can be suffocating sometimes," he said to one neighbor with a chuckle. She just needed a little space. But not everyone believed him. A friend who rang the house claimed she heard the phone picked up, yet no voice spoke. Just a hollow breathing and then the click of the line going dead. The unease began to spread. People noticed the absence, the curtains that never shifted, the way Rowan seemed too rehearsed in his grief. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it, but her disappearance was only the beginning of the horror. The unease that spread through. The neighborhood soon reached Eliza's family. Calls went unanswered. Letters remained unopened. Finally, her younger brother, Lawrence, reported her missing. Police arrived at the house with quiet suspicion masked as routine concern. Rowan greeted them with his usual poise, offering tea as though it were a casual visit. But officers noticed details. The faint scratch marks on the banister, the locked bedroom door, the lingering smell of bleach that clung to the hallway. When they searched the master bedroom, they found what Rowan had overlooked. Beneath a stack of folded clothes in the dresser's bottom drawer was a small, leather-bound diary. Its pages were filled with hurried, frantic handwriting. "He twists my words until I feel insane. I think he wants me gone." The perfume, the earrings. "I'm not safe here anymore." The entries grew darker as the weeks progressed, her fear seeping through every line. But one page froze the officers in silence. A rough sketch of Rowan's face, eyes hollow, lips curled, into something monstrous, and at the very end her final words, written with a shaking hand, "If anything happens to me, it was him." The diary was enough to shatter Rowan's polished veneer. At first, he dismissed it as the ramblings of an overly emotional wife. But detectives were already digging deeper. Each question chipped at his mask. In the interrogation room, the charm that once captivated Eliza faltered under fluorescent light. "You've read her diary, haven't you?" Detective Harland asked, sliding the leather-bound book across the table. Rowan's jaw tightened, though his lips curled into a thin smile. "A diary isn't evidence, it's fantasy," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. As hours stretched on, cracks widened. Financial records revealed mounting debts, secret loans and accounts Eliza knew nothing about. Phone records exposed late-night calls to multiple women, some fleeting, others lasting hours. The image of a devoted husband crumbled into that of a man desperate, cornered, and addicted to control. The motive emerged like a bruise spreading beneath the skin. Love had long ago rotted into greed, and obsession had sharpened into something lethal. On the evidence board, detectives pinned photographs side by side, Eliza's smiling wedding portrait against bank statements, against the grainy CCTV of Rowan meeting an unknown woman in a hotel bar. The picture told a story more damning than his words ever could. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. Without Eliza's body, the case could slip through their hands, and Rowan knew it. But the evidence alone wasn't enough. They needed her body. Without Eliza's body, Rowan's lies still had room to breathe. Detectives pushed harder, retracing his movements in the days surrounding her disappearance. One detail stood out: a fuel receipt from a remote village on the edge of Somerset, far from anywhere Rowan had reason to be. A search team swept through the woodlands near the receipt's location. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss and rotting leaves. Flashlights cut through the darkness, beams scattering across tangled branches and uneven ground. Then one officer called out, his voice low but certain. A patch of earth had been disturbed, soil packed too tightly, too recently. The toe of a boot revealed something pale beneath the dirt, a strip of fabric, floral and faded. They dug carefully, the silence of the forest broken only by the scrape of shovels and the hush of breath. Slowly, the outline emerged. A body wrapped crudely in sheets, the edges stained deep with earth and decay. It was Eliza. Even in death, she looked fragile, as though the violence that ended her life had stolen not only her breath, but every fragment of the love she had once believed in. The officers stood in grim silence, the illusion of a perfect marriage collapsing into dust with every handful of soil removed. But their work was not over, because buried with her was something Rowan had never intended them to find, and what they found buried with her was even more disturbing. The discovery in the woods left Rowan with no room to hide, yet in court he played his role to perfection. Dressed in a tailored suit, hair neatly combed, he sat at the defense table with the composure of a widower crushed by tragedy. His barrister painted him as a victim of circumstance, a man whose wife was fragile, unstable, prone to fantasy. But the prosecution carried a weapon stronger than his charm: Eliza's words. Her diary was read aloud, page after page, her voice resurrected through ink and trembling handwriting. Each entry revealed her fear, her suspicions, and her certainty that Rowan meant her harm. Witnesses stepped forward, their testimonies cutting through his carefully constructed facade. Friends described the change in Eliza's demeanor. Once vibrant, now withdrawn, glancing over her shoulder as though danger lurked behind every door. Neighbors spoke of muffled screams, of nights when silence felt heavier than noise. On the screen, photographs appeared. The cracked mirror, the perfume-stained shirt, the shallow grave. The jury shifted in their seats as the mask of the grieving husband dissolved, revealing something colder, hungrier, unrecognizable. Rowan's confident smile faltered for the first time, his eyes narrowing not in grief, but in rage. The air in the courtroom grew heavy. everyone knowing the decision that loomed would change everything. The verdict would seal his fate, but not everyone found peace. The gavel fell, and with it came the word everyone had been waiting for: guilty. Rowan was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his expression unreadable, his footsteps echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Eliza's family clutched one another, but there were no tears of joy, no sighs of relief. Her mother, Margaret, held a framed photograph of her daughter close to her chest, rocking gently as though the picture itself might breathe again if she cradled it tightly enough. Justice, they were told, had been served. Yet to them it felt hollow, a cold exchange that could never bring Eliza back. She told people she wrote it down, and still no one saved her. Margaret whispered outside the courthouse steps, her voice cracking under the weight of guilt. The questions gnawed at everyone. Had they dismissed her too easily? Had the system failed her long before the trial began? Inside his cell, Rowan smirked when the verdict was mentioned, leaning toward a guard with words that crawled like poison. This isn't over. She'll never leave me, not really. And even in prison, his chilling words would haunt those he left behind. Rowan's words in prison might have unsettled those who heard them, but Eliza's voice refused to be silenced. Her diary, fragile leather worn smooth by trembling hands, became the centerpiece of the story long after the trial ended. Prosecutors had read from it in court, their voices steady, each line cutting like glass. But outside the courtroom, her words spread further. Journalists pored over every page, recording them for late-night documentaries, dissecting them in printed columns. I love him, but I don't recognize him anymore. If I disappear, please believe me when I say I was afraid. Each entry painted not only the picture of a marriage collapsing, but of a woman suffocated by the very love she once celebrated. The intimacy of her handwriting. Loops pressed harder when her fear grew, ink smudged by tears, struck harder than photographs ever could. Her brother Lawrence agreed to read a passage at a memorial service. His voice cracked as he held the diary open with shaking fingers. He tells me I imagine things, but my body feels the fear. My heart knows it. The crowd fell silent, the only sound the rustle of pages moving in the cold wind. Television. Crews replayed those moments again and again, her words echoing in living rooms across Britain. She became a voice for countless others trapped behind closed doors, silenced by manipulation and fear. And yet, among the pages, something remained, hidden. Folded between diary entries was a letter, sealed, never delivered. A letter that revealed her final attempt to escape. The letter Eliza never sent spoke of escape, of train tickets she had hidden, of a friend waiting to take her in. Yet she never made it that far. The ink of her final plea blurred where a tear had fallen, the last fragment of hope preserved, in silence. And so the story circled back to its beginning, to that day beneath soft lights when Rowan's smile was worshipped by guests and her trembling hand slipped into his. "Till death do us part," he had whispered, his voice thick with charm. No one saw the shadow behind the words. The vows that were meant to bind two souls became shackles of destruction. For Eliza, love had been blinding, a shield she clung to against the doubts of friends, against the cracks that had begun to spread through the glass of her life. For Rowan, love was never love at all. It was possession. It was greed disguised in tenderness, obsession hidden behind devotion. Their wedding photo still exists, framed once in pride, later archived in evidence. A smiling bride, a proud groom. Yet when officers removed it from the mantel, a thin burn mark had begun to creep at the corner from a candle left too close. The edges blackened as though the image itself couldn't bear the lie. Rowan's prison door now closes each night with a metallic echo, the vows he twisted replaying in his solitude. Eliza's diary rests in an evidence locker, her words immortalized, her voice no longer silenced. And those who hear her story are left with one truth that chills deeper than any verdict. He married her for love, but in the end, love was the weapon that killed her.